In 1964, Chrysler engineers began working on an engine so radical that insiders later gave it the nickname Doomsday. It was unlike anything seen in American racing at the time. 4 overhead camshafts, 4 valves per cylinder, and a layout that was closer to Formula One than traditional stock car technology. The design was so advanced that when Ford got word of it, they accused Chrysler of going too far. NASCAR quickly stepped in and changed the rulebook, effectively banning the project before it ever reached competition. What was left of the engine was locked away inside Chrysler's archives, fueling rumors that it was more than just a race motor. It was a secret weapon in the escalating horsepower wars. The mid-1960s were the peak of Detroit's muscle car rivalry. Every manufacturer was fighting for speed, dominance, and national bragging rights. Chrysler had just shocked the industry with a 1-2-3 sweep at the 1964 Daytona 500 thanks to the newly developed 426 Hemi. Ford, unwilling to be overshadowed, rushed its own counterattack, the legendary 427 DOHC Camera engine built in only 90 days. But inside Chrysler, lead engineer Bill Wiertman wasn't impressed. To him, Ford's single overhead cam was a quick fix, not a revolution. His response was bold. He recalled, "We wanted to go nuclear." The Chrysler team set out to build something nobody in American motorsport had ever attempted, a dual overhead cam, 4-valve per cylinder version of the Hemi. Working in secrecy at Chrysler's Highland Park Engineering Center, Wiertman's team, alongside metallurgist Richard Moser, developed the experimental engine known as the A-925 Hemi. Their target was staggering for the era, over 600 horsepower at 7,000 RPM, with the durability to withstand NASCAR competition. The A925 was built around a modified 426 Hemi block, but because it didn't need traditional lifter bores or pushrod passages, it was machined specifically for its overhead cam layout. Each head carried 2 camshafts, one driving the intake valves and the other the exhaust, allowing room for a 4-valve per cylinder setup. The cylinder heads used a pent roof design, an evolution of the classic hemispherical chamber, which dramatically improved airflow and combustion efficiency. With 16 intake valves and 16 exhaust valves, the airflow potential was far beyond anything Chrysler or any American manufacturer had attempted before. To feed this monster, engineers created a custom intake manifold that met NASCAR's single carburetor requirement but distributed air to 16 separate intake runners. Unlike most intakes of the era, which were aluminum, this one was cast in magnesium, a highly flammable metal. Even the valve covers were magnesium, showcasing just how far Chrysler was pushing the limits of material science. On paper, the A925 was capable of astonishing performance. Estimates placed it well above 500 horsepower naturally aspirated, with the ability to rev beyond 7,000 RPM. For testing, Chrysler engineers even used an electric motor and transmission to simulate high RPM operation without combustion, allowing them to stress test the valve train. But problems soon surfaced. During a 1964 dyno session, the camshaft towers fractured at 6,500 RPM, revealing that the iron block couldn't handle the extreme stresses. Titanium components could have solved the issue, but in the 1960s, titanium was considered space-age metal and far too costly for mass production. Meanwhile, Ford caught wind of the A925 through leaks and quickly complained to NASCAR. Officials responded by banning overhead cam engines entirely, killing Ford's Cammer and Chrysler's prototype in one sweep. But inside Chrysler, there were other forces at play. Executives saw the A925 as too experimental, too dangerous, and far too expensive to justify when the conventional 426 Hemi was already a proven race winner. Magnesium's fire hazard, the fragile prototype hardware, and the need for advanced alloys all made the project risky. More importantly, Chrysler's leadership was focused on military contracts and profitability, not on bankrolling an exotic race motor with no guaranteed future. The A925 Hemi was shelved, officially because of NASCAR's rule change, but unofficially because it was a technological gamble. Manufacturing it in volume would have required new tooling, specialized training, and potentially endless warranty nightmares if it reached the street. In an era shifting towards emission standards and safety regulations, Chrysler executives chose the safe path. Instead of investing in the futuristic DOHC Hemi, they doubled down on the 426 Hemi, which went on to dominate drag racing, NASCAR, and muscle car culture for decades. The Doomsday Engine became an engineering legend, brilliant but doomed by politics, cost, and timing.
Chrysler had built something far ahead of its era, a glimpse of what American racing could have become, only to bury it before the world ever saw its true potential.
The A-925 project was always seen as a gamble. Too costly, too complex, and with no clear path to mass production. Chrysler executives ultimately decided to back the proven 426 Hemi instead of risking resources on an experimental design. But behind the corporate decision lay something more intriguing. In the 1960s, Chrysler was far more than just a car company. They were deeply tied to the U.S. military-industrial complex, contributing to programs like the Redstone missile and the Saturn I rocket. This government involvement gave them access to technology and restrictions that few automakers ever experienced. Some enthusiasts have speculated that the A-925 wasn't simply a racing engine. Its exotic alloys, lightweight construction, and high-revving architecture may have been explored for dual purposes: military vehicles, experimental aerospace platforms, or even armored reconnaissance units. Was it purely a racing engine, or was it a testbed for advanced government-linked projects? The truth remains hazy. Only 2 A-925 engines were ever completed, and for decades they were thought to be lost. Then, in the early 1980s, Mopar enthusiast John Mahoney stumbled across what would become one of the most remarkable finds in muscle car history. At a Detroit car event, he first heard whispers about the mysterious engine. Following the trail, Mahoney tracked down a Kansas school teacher named Herb Wilson, who once raced cars on weekends and happened to own the complete A-925 unit. Wilson no longer needed it, and Mahoney purchased the engine, carefully storing it in his Kansas City garage. For years, it sat hidden from public view, shown only to close friends. Few people outside that circle even knew one of Chrysler's most secret engineering projects was quietly resting in private hands. By 2018, Mahoney's friends convinced him it was time to share the treasure with the wider Mopar community. Together with fellow enthusiast Mike Ford, he gathered the parts and prepared the engine for public display. In 2019, at the MCACN show, Muscle Car and Corvette Nationals in Indianapolis, the A925 was unveiled. For many fans, seeing the engine in person was like discovering a lost relic. It was proof that the myths were real. Mahoney didn't stop there. Driven to piece together the engine's history, he contacted Richard Moser, the metallurgist who had worked on the original project in 1964. To his surprise, Moser still had the original design drawings of the camshaft layout. Later, Mahoney reached out to Bill Wiertman, Chrysler's legendary engineer who had overseen the A925 program. Wiertman shared rare photographs from the development period, helping reconstruct the story behind the prototype. Compared to the engines of its time, the A925 was in a league of its own. American V8s in the 1960s typically relied on pushrods and focused on torque-heavy designs. Ford's 427 SOHC camera was advanced, but it still didn't reach the level of innovation Chrysler attempted. With its dual overhead cams, 4-valve heads, and magnesium components, the A925 looked like something out of a Formula One paddock than a Detroit muscle car shop. The lightweight alloys and penta-roof chamber design showed just how far Chrysler was willing to push engineering boundaries. Over the years, Mahoney continued searching for missing components, headers, pulleys, and intake pieces, hoping one day to fully restore the engine for display at events such as the Carlisle Chrysler Nationals. For him, the A925 wasn't just a piece of metal, but a piece of lost history worth preserving. Unfortunately, the engine never saw competition. It was never bolted into a race car, never tested on a drag strip, and never had the chance to prove its worth in NASCAR. Its fate was sealed by rule changes, budget constraints, and corporate caution. Today, only a handful of physical remnants from the A925 program exist. A single prototype cylinder head surfaced decades later in a private sale, and the magnesium intake and valve covers that survived are now considered holy grails for Mopar collectors. Nearly all of the documentation was discarded or classified, leaving enthusiasts to piece together the story from fragments. The A925 remains one of the great what-ifs in American performance history. Had it survived testing and cleared NASCAR's rulebook, legends like Richard Petty or David Pearson might have piloted cars powered by this futuristic engine. Instead, Chrysler placed its full weight behind the 426 Hemi, the simpler and more reliable powerhouse that went on to define an era. While the Hemi became a legend, the A-925 was buried as a myth, remembered not for its victories, but for its potential. For Mopar enthusiasts, the A-925 is more than just a lost experiment. It is a reminder of a moment when Chrysler dared to think beyond its time, building an engine that hinted at a future America never got to see.